Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to a new episode of Project LS400, my 1994 Lexus LS400 that's still under covers because it has been hibernating for over a year now over here in the family farmhouse. Last year the car has been out, but it hasn't been on the road. Reason was I simply didn't have time. I was waiting for parts. I had a lot of other things on my hands, so simply I couldn't make any videos because I wasn't working on the car. That's changing now. I have to do a small thing to the car in order to help someone else out. Let me explain what I want to do in this video. So let's start by uncovering the car, and in the meantime I can tell you the story about my Lexus LS400. This is a 1994 Lexus LS400 which I bought off of a scrapyard. Doesn't need to be completely uncovered. I bought it off of a scrapyard in an almost non-running state. It was drivable, but it wasn't road legal and road worthy anymore. And over the course of 2-3 years I've been working on the car, made it roadworthy, got it MOT'd, and now it's legal and good and safe to drive on the road again. But there are many small things I need to iron out. Some are concerning the drivability. There are a lot of cosmetics, things that need to be done. The car needs to be repainted at some point in time, but first I wanted to have in 100% technical state. Now the entire process of repairing my LS400 became Project LS400, a YouTube series, and I put a link to the playlist on screen here, so if you want you can watch it. I tried to document all the work, to gather information about these cars and hopefully help others to keep their LS400 running. And this episode will be about a electronic repair, namely the climate control panel. A common issue with these cars is that the LCD display in the climate control panel goes black over time, and since it is a common problem there are a lot of repair parts available. So I ordered a new LCD display, put it in, and it was working perfectly fine. Until it didn't, because I have the problem after I adjusted the temperature or operated the climate control. There is a readout in the display, but it goes blank after a while, and that's something that I need to look into. But for this episode I have another reason to pull the climate control panel out, and that has an interesting backstory. Because yesterday a viewer from Belgium drove all the way from Brussels to my house in the north of the Netherlands, and he dropped off some parts, an instrument panel, a climate control panel, and some replacement electronics that he bought off of the internet. And currently I'm working on the climate control panel, and I found a part, some components that were completely blown off and basically obliterated the circuit board at that point. And I can replace the circuit board, I can repair the traces, but I don't know the specifications of the components that were blown off. So my idea is to get my climate control panel out and look at the circuit board, and hopefully I will be able to read the specifications on those small SMD components. So just going to get started, and I'll show you once everything is out. Put a gear shift lever in the N position, and then you can lift off this surround that's on the hood. Then you can pull out the ashtray, and in my case there are 3 connectors to unhook. On the bottom of the radio there are 2 screws, and now we need to pull the fans out, and the connector is on the bottom, and over here on top we have 2 screws. Now we're able to pull this entire bit out, and now we have the entire assembly out. And now I'm gonna take this home. And there we are at my little garden shed, at my electronics workbench, and over here is the climate control panel from my Lexus LS400. Now let's get the problem at hand. There it is, and that upper one is the climate control panel from the Toyota Celsior, which is a right-hand drive version. And if you look up closely, you can see that everything is mirrored. And that's especially how Toyota did it in the 1980s and 1990s. The left-hand drive and the right-hand drive versions, everything was exactly mirrored. Even if you look at the order of these buttons, auto and off is mirrored between the left-hand drive and the right-hand drive version. Now we have the gauge cluster over here. Now that of course is a little bit hard to show, but even the order of the gauges inside here are exactly mirrored. So over here we have the fuel gauge, speedometer, tachometer, coolant temperature, and that order is different on the left-hand drive version. Everything is mirrored, and they made some specific versions for French-speaking countries too. So a whole lot of double work, I would say. Now the problem at hand started with this gauge cluster. The background illumination wasn't working right, and what the owner did, he took off the power supply board, which is this one here. This one is original to the car. This comes from the Toyota Celsior, and it didn't work. Then the owner bought a replacement circuit board, which is this one over here, and it worked better. The problem it had, that only the needles of the gauges were working and not the background illumination. When he installed the board, and this comes from a right-hand drive Lexus LS400, things were working. Then something popped, started to smell, and then he gave up. Now let's look at this board first. So the owner told me that this started to smell and burn, and then everything stopped working, including the entire background illumination of the dashboard, so even on the center console. And that makes sense because the illumination, entire dashboard illumination, button illumination, is controlled from this board. So here we have the problem at hand, and if you look up close, when I took it out, I immediately noticed this area over here. I made some pictures because I've been working on this, and as you can see over here was a component, and that was completely blown off. It was in bits and pieces, and if you look up real close, you can see burn marks on the circuit board. It completely burned through the solder mask, and yeah, the traces are mostly gone. When we flip it over, already desoldered within that white circle there was a capacitor, which I have here. Is leaking. It's leaking badly, and I'm not sure what caused what, but over here you can see the traces are damaged. So I will try to reconstruct this, but the important thing for me to know is the specifications of that little part that was completely burned. Where is it? It's over there. So that's why I took my climate control panel out. I'm going to remove that circuit board and see if I can find the part that should be on there. These are the circuit boards out, and I can see straight away that these circuit boards are completely different. I just showed you I also have the printed circuit boards for the power supply on the back of the instrument panel, one for the Celsior, one for the LS400, but they also are different, and I don't know exactly what the differences are in there. There are minor differences, but this looks completely different. When I hold this next to it, yeah, it doesn't look anything like the one from the LS400. You can clearly see this is older generation. The traces on here are much smaller, and the SMD, the surface mount devices, are smaller. So this is a newer generation of electronics, and now I have to figure out another way how to to determine which component is missing here. That's something for the next scene. Man, I gotta love my kerosene heater, because it's a nice 27 degrees inside, and outdoors it's like, well, 5 degrees. Anyway, I've been working on this. I'm gonna show this in a second. So I needed an idea on these small components that exploded on this circuit board, and I was a little bit back and forth between a voltage regulator and a transistor. It's an SOT89 package, but I posted pictures and asked a question online on an electronics engineers forum, and within 2 hours I had an idea. It is a transistor, PNP transistor, and I'll put the part number in screen here. And I ordered it, and it takes a couple of days for them to arrive. Also, this package came in today. This is package 1 of 2. The second comes in tomorrow, and this contains the replacement capacitors for the power supply circuit board, the original to the car power supply circuit board that sits on the back of this gauge cluster. That's something for later. First I want to focus on repairing the traces over here, and while I was waiting I started looking at the circuit board, the power supply circuit board that exploded, and boy, it literally exploded, because look at this, all the black spots over there. So here is a coil, an inductor coil. I soldered the other one off, and as you can see it has burn marks on the lower end. So I'm not sure if this is any good. I will try to measure it with my multimeter. But as you can see, if you look up close, you can see the fibers of the circuit board. So the entire surface is damaged. All the pads and traces are burned, and this is what remains. So killed in action. But this is something for later. First I want to focus on repairing the traces on this, and when the new transistors come in I can solder them on. I'm going to do that off camera because it's a lot of finicky work. It's very boring, so I'll pick you up once I have the traces remade on this. Well, it's 2.5 hours of tinkering later. Let me put it this way so I have it center in screen, and I'll zoom in. Anyway, it was nice finicky work, and I kind of enjoy doing this work, even though there was a lot of damage over here. So let's zoom in to the missing pad that I had to recreate. So I desoldered the other transistor nearby, which is over here, and this is what the pad looks like underneath. Then we have a small little SMD capacitor over here, and in this area I had to recreate that pad, and there's a tiny little bit of copper wire to make sure there's enough connection, and I cut this out of copper tape, and I tried to recreate the general shape of this over here, which wasn't easy, and just for good measure I also put in a new trace of copper wire over here. Now let's flip it over to the other side. We don't have too much glare. There was more damage than I had expected. So here was a capacitor that had been leaking, and that ate away this via here, and that's the one you saw on the other side coming through. So again, same piece of copper wire, and I tinned it and just put it on the existing trace. And there's another one over here, but I have good continuity from its test point all the way to the back. And there is one trace leading to this flex cable that I also needed to repair, because it had seen some heat damage from the exploding transistor on the opposite side. Yeah, it's real finicky work, but as I said, I really enjoy doing this. I'm gonna look in the box that arrived today, and if the correct transistor is in there, I'm gonna put it in. Okay, we're 2 days later, and I can finally start working again. So the replacement capacitors are in, and all the capacitors are now soldered onto this board, and the only thing left to do is to solder the new transistors on, which just came in via the mail. There's a small anti-static bag, and in here is a strip, let me unpack it, of 10 of those tiny transistors. So if you're familiar with this method, they are shipped in this form. On the strip you have to peel off the film, and then you can solder them on. So let's fire up my soldering station. So my soldering iron is super fast to warm up always. It only takes a couple of seconds. Pad that was not damaged. And I hope my head isn't too much in shot. And whoa, try to locate it without getting too much heat in this tiny little transistor. So the problem is I am worried that a blob of solder may create a bridge between the left pad and the center pad. That's what I'm trying to avoid here. I can measure for continuity, but you also have continuity inside this component, so I really have to look very carefully to see if it's not bridged anyway. And now it is completely soldered in, and I think it's good. I'm gonna get a magnifying glass just to make sure that I don't have any bridging between those legs. That's what can happen with the new pads that I put on, that they shift a little bit and they bridge between each other. And this here is the end result. The conformal coating usually is a bit more shiny, but I'm happy with the end result. So now I'm gonna solder the entire board back together, and hopefully I can find the right electric schematics, and then we can test it, but keeping our fingers crossed. I wanted to give one tip when you are disassembling and especially assembling the climate control unit. So there is this plastic divider piece in there, and it can be a little bit of a puzzle to get it in. Please note that it has a lip around one side. Not sure how well this shows on camera. I also marked the front, and the rear side is flat, and it goes in like this. You put it in from the top, and then you click it in from the bottom. But first you have to connect the front panel. And by the way, this Japanese writing on here, I looked it up, and it says prioritize rear seat. So the fans in the rear get priority over the front inhabitants. That's for cars that are being used to chauffeur people around. So that's all those cables in place. Now get this divider piece in, slot it in from the top, and then click it in at the bottom, which is easier said than done. And then the front panel clicks in place. Yeah, there it is. I tested everything. That's something I've done off camera. I know everything is working fine, so now it can go back on, and you can test it from the back of the circuit board, by the way. So I only have to screw this back together, and we are good to go. I was tinkering with the gauge cluster. Now there's a couple of things that I wanted to show you. First of all, this is not an LS400, but a Toyota Celsior gauge cluster, and it's much simpler when you look at the amount of indicator lights, warning lights over here, in comparison with the LS400. There are much less indicator lights. Also, this is a Celsior which was only sold in Japan, and the speedometer only goes to 180. Hope it can show you, but look, there's 180 kilometers an hour. The reason I'm taking this off is that I wanted to have a look at the fuel gauge. As you can see, all gauges drop to zero when the car is off, power is off, except for the fuel gauge. And to be honest, I've been looking at my LS400 gauge cluster, and I'm not even sure if the fuel gauge drops to zero when the car is off. I just wanted to make sure that it's working correctly, but I can move it, so there is movement. But it feels like there is a little stepper motor in there. Don't quote me on that, but I will have a look at the circuit board on the back here to see if I can find any bad capacitors. Just for good measurement, I'm gonna take them all off, test them, and replace them if necessary. So let's turn it around. I took the main circuit board off already, and I'm just going to have a peek off camera, and if I find anything, I'll show you. So not only is this a Toyota Celsior gauge cluster, which is a little bit simpler in its layout, it also is a pre-update version with the mechanical odometer. And I know between the update version and the pre-update version of the Lexus LS400 there are a lot of technical differences. We saw that also in the connectors on the back of the climate control, which looks very different, and also a lot of ECUs between the pre-update and the update version are different, and the update versions are the versions built after August 1992. There was a big technical overhaul, and its exterior changes were minor, but the technical changes were very big, and that's also what you can see when you pull out this gauge cluster. So I'm taking this apart for one reason. So this is what it looks like on the back. So these are mounted to the fascia, I would say, so to the dials itself. Now I'm going to put this aside. There it is. The reason I'm taking this apart is because of these luminescent tubes. These are very brittle, and once they go out, there is no way of replacing or repairing them. You can find a part number for this on Amayama, for instance, but they're out of stock, and if these are broken, you have to find a way making this work with LEDs. I am very much against putting LEDs in these cars. So what I'm going to do is what often happens, and you can see it around here in this area. You can see a lot of this soot, that what you get with circuit board stuff, that you get a sort of soot buildup, and it especially vaporizes or drops down on this luminescent tube. So I will see if I can get them out and give them a cleaning so they are a bit brighter once they are back in. So while I have the mechanical odometer out, I also want to give this a clean. This suffered from the same soot buildup, and it's driven by a small electric motor. Here's a little incandescent bulb and a light bridge over here that illuminates the numbers. This also suffers from the same sort of soot that's everywhere, so I want to clean this little lens, check if the light bulb still works, and I also want to clean the row of numbers, especially the decimals and the units are a little bit dirty. They go around most often. So and it's interesting to see that this car only has 120,295 kilometers on the odometer, so it's barely run in. So I have the power supply set to 9 volts and just probe it this way. Oh, that works nice. I have a blue marker over here, and I've done that in the starlet too, where you have a green filter over the bulbs, and just recolor it with a permanent marker. Allow it some time to dry. Power supply set to 11 volts. Doesn't look much different, but maybe on camera. Now the last thing I don't want to do is to lubricate that gear that's in here. So I'm going to screw off this little electric motor and then put some grease in there. I hope this comes apart. There's this little worm gear in here. Does the camera want to focus? There's a worm gear in here. Good thing that I recorded the odometer reading, so if I disrupt anything I can bring it back to the original position. I always like to use one of these little brushes. They come with a razor, a Philly shave razor like thing. Just wash off all the old grease. Add a couple of meters extra on the odometer. Hope the owner doesn't blame me, because there is some excess grease on the back, and I was feeling it. Yeah, it runs smooth, no problems there. Also saw 3-in-1 oil being used. There's a little drop on there. This already is too much, but I only have machine grease. It's this stuff. It's like a caramel paste, but I've been using this a lot and I don't have any bad experience with it. Scoop up a little bit, put some on the teeth. Finally, here is the little circuit board that sits on the back of the gauge cluster, and what I like to do, always check out these light bulbs, because there's always one, namely for the D position of the transmission, that's always illuminated while driving, and the filament vaporizes against the inside of the glass bulb, making it a bit dimmer than the other ones. So what I do, I take one of the other control lamps out and change positions. The one that's least used is the L position of the transmission, so I switch the D to the L position. Oh, this is the D position, by the way. And then finally we're going to have a look at the back, because there are some capacitors over here. I want to desolder all of them just for good measure, test them. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm looking at the gauge cluster right now. The fuel gauge is on this side, and if that's not working, it's usually because of one of the capacitors in that circuit, which could be one of those capacitors. So while I was preparing to desolder the capacitors, I noticed this little device here over at my left hand. It's a plastic gray thingy, and it can be taken off the gauge cluster, or at least the circuit board. And it has two contact pins and some small electronics in here for its aids. These are very modern technologies. Those small SMD components are found nowhere else in the LS400, and it is marked with a plus. I thought maybe it's a battery for memory of the clock, but of course there is no clock in this instrument panel. But I think this is the little chime that sounds when you reach maximum speed. I'm gonna leave it off, and as you can see, I have all the bulbs out, the incandescent bulbs, they're all tested, they're all good. I'm gonna desolder the capacitors again off camera, and I'll let you know what the results are. I am finished testing the capacitors, and there's only one that was a little bit out of spec. It should be 470 microfarad, and it came out as 452. I'm gonna see if I have a replacement for this one, but all the other capacitors tested good, well within spec. They were only 1 decimal point off, so I'm not going to replace them. Yes, I have them in stock, but if I keep on replacing capacitors that are good, I'm burning through my materials, and that's not the intention. I really want to replace capacitors that are obviously out of spec. So I am going to solder everything back in, and then we're ready to reassemble the instrument panel. And this is the last screw that goes in. I left my maker's mark on there with a date saying what I've done to this gauge cluster. It came disassembled, so I had to find out the cable routing in here. And two things to note: before you put on the lens, you have to put on the odometer. But anyway, as you can see, I put some cling foil on here to prevent it from damaging, from scratching. It does scratch quite easily. Anyway, it's back together, and as said, if I find the pin out, I want to see if I can test it, if the needles and the background lighting fires up. Well folks, it is dinner time. Yeah, it's a bit bright, but 18:02 it says. There's my flashing light on, there's the power supply, and let me get the lights out. We now have a working instrument panel again. Yay! Well, there's only one thing left to do, and that's to test the climate control panel, or the climate control unit, but that's something that I cannot do. I know what the power and grounds are, but even if I connect that, it will not work as a standalone unit, so I cannot test anything, because there are a lot of inputs and outputs that need to be connected, otherwise it won't start up. This is a real computer, and I won't be able to test anything from here. It can only be tested once it is in the car, and that's something that the owner himself has to do once he gets it back. And I left a maker's mark on here. If he returns it, I know what I have done and what I may need to do later on, but hopefully this works now. This was a fairly simple fix with some replacements and some trace damage repair. Now there's one other thing left to do, and that's my own climate control panel with the LCD going blank, but I leave that for a future episode. I'm gonna look into that later on. And also, let me see, where did I leave it? I want to see if I'm able to fix this completely exploded circuit board that the owner installed. That's the one from the right hand drive LS400. This may be a lot of work, but yeah, it's a hobby for me, and it may be a good practice for myself and my repair skills. I'm not a professional, but I'm trying to learn here, and this will be maybe a very interesting case, but I think it is too far gone. But if you don't try, you'll never know. Anyway, I want to end this episode here. I would like to thank you for watching. Hopefully you found some useful information that may be helpful to repair your LS400 or Toyota Celsior for that matter. If it was helpful to you, if you want to buy me a coffee, I'll leave the link for that down below in the description box. And for now, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye!